Since I was sick of unpacking, I decided to spend the next morning outside on the steps of our new home, a brownstone building in Harlem, which is way on the upper west side of Manhattan. Mom was busy with meetings at her new job at the Columbia University Medical Center. She gave me permission to explore the neighborhood, as long as I was careful and remained in a 10-block radius of our building. Careful? I'd rather take my chances on the streets of Manhattan than be stuck inside an apartment building with some girl who liked to set off explosives. As much as I wanted to walk around my new neighborhood and maybe also meet some people who weren't trying to kill me, I was a little overwhelmed. New York City was very different from anywhere else we had lived. On the army posts, we were relatively contained. Now the possibilities were endless. I had no idea where to start. Did I head east or west? Or uptown, downtown, and which way was east or west? Instead, I settled in with my journal. Yeah, it was old school that I favored pen and paper over a computer, but there was something, I don't know, more personal about writing a story out with your hand instead of tapping at a keyboard. Not like I had done a lot of writing lately. I hadn't written anything in months. I had tried, but I just couldn't do it. It was pretty ironic that when things were actually happening in my life, I froze. But now, I suddenly had an itch to write. I looked at the blank pages, trying to find some way to describe what happened yesterday. How did this little girl know all that stuff about Mom? And the mover? I was fascinated, but also really creeped out. I considered myself lucky she hadn't turned her attention toward me. Just then, the front door opened and shut with a bang. Without even turning my head, I knew my luck had run out. Shelby skipped down the steps, leading a white and brown English bulldog on a leash. "John Watson," she nodded at me. "Meet Sir Arthur." I reached down and petted the dog, who slumped happily and rolled over so I could rub his belly. Great. The only living creature to welcome me to town was a slobbering dog. Sir Arthur? "Well, he is British," she remarked, "and the best dog ever, since the Queen hasn't seen fit to reply to my correspondence about making such an extraordinary animal an official member of the Order of the British Empire. I have taken it upon myself to honor him with the designation of respect he deserves and call him Sir." That dictionary Grandma had also given me was going to get some serious use if I kept talking to Shelby Holmes. She bent down to give him a quick belly rub. "Well, we've got our rounds to make. Come on." The dog rose reluctantly and continued down the stairs. "Wait!" I called out, surprising myself. Before I could really think things through, I decided to go for broke. "Can I come with you?" Yeah, she was strange, but I had to find out how she had done all that stuff yesterday. Okay, and I was a little intimidated to walk around the neighborhood by myself. Not like a tiny girl could do much to defend me, but at least we had Sir Arthur. Shelby shrugged indifferently. "Suit yourself." As we walked down our street, lined with brownstones that matched our building, Shelby launched into a detailed explanation of her rounds. Honestly, I could only follow part of what she said. She talked really fast and was rattling off a long list of people she always checked in with daily. I did, however, understand one thing. Shelby Holmes was a very nosy girl. I started to count the blocks as Shelby turned onto Lenox Avenue. That's 1 block away from home. I was surprised by all the taxis and cars that whizzed by. There were so many things to take in. The noise, the stores with signs in foreign languages, the people, the different outfits. One guy had on colorful silk pajamas and a matching hat. And the crowds as we crossed 125th Street. Now we were 5 blocks away from home, or was it 6? I nodded at a guy who was selling hats at a stand. He had these cool twists in his hair. There should be no surprise that the barbers on army posts only knew one style. Buzz cut. Nearly every single person we saw greeted Shelby by name. "How's it going, Sal?" she asked a jolly-looking man as we passed by a pizzeria. "Any news?" He waved happily at her. "Do you and your friend want a free pie?" "No, thanks," she replied as she kept her fast pace up. Sal simply shook his head and walked back into his restaurant. Did you just say no to free pizza? Who does that? And why was he offering it to her? "I have things to do, places to be." "Okay, but still, who turns down free pizza?" I ignored my now rumbling stomach and tried to keep up with Shelby. It didn't matter if the person was old or young, female or male, black or white, or Asian or Latino, and I thought army posts were diverse. Everybody seemed happy to see Shelby. They obviously knew something I didn't. So this is a pretty friendly and safe neighborhood, huh? I asked. I assumed a big city like New York wouldn't be the kind of place where your neighbors were your friends. But maybe I was wrong. It depends. On what? On who you are, she said with a confident swagger that was usually reserved for professional ball players. I did my best not to laugh at her. I mean, seriously. She wasn't even 4 feet tall. The baggy jean shorts and purple t-shirt she was wearing made her skinny stature stick out even more. It looked as if her hair hadn't seen a comb in months. She seemed exactly like the kind of person people would mess with. But what did I know? I was a new kid, and everybody in the neighborhood seemed to respect her. Ah, just the person I wanted to see. She jogged over to the corner where a scruffy white guy with long dreads was going through the trash. Seen anything unusual today? Nah, he rubbed his scraggly beard. You know, I'd tell you if I did. She nodded as she pulled out a banana from her oversized backpack. Thanks, Billy. Then she tossed a perfectly good banana into the trash can between them. Thanks, Shelby. Billy removed the banana from the trash and shuffled away. He's a freegan, she explained, sensing my bewilderment. He believes in only eating food that's already been thrown away. Strange, perhaps, but it also means he's quite knowledgeable about what people have in their trash. That's a handy contact. I had no idea what she was talking about, but nodded anyway. I figured it was time for me to get the answers I was really interested in. How did you know all those details about my mom? What? She was examining the headlines of a discarded newspaper. How did you know my mom served in Afghanistan? Oh, that, she replied, like it was no big deal, like everybody could read minds. It's fairly simple. First, your moving boxes had the names of a few army posts written on them, so I knew you were a military family. There was a medical license on the counter. The sole of your mother's right shoe was worn down considerably compared to her left, which means she favors her right side. Based on the boxes, I deduced that an injury sustained during a tour of duty was likely. That meant either Iraq or Afghanistan. Judging by her age and her barely strained gait, I assumed she hasn't been abroad in about 2 years. Therefore, Afghanistan was my conclusion. But you were only in the apartment for a minute. So, her attention was now on a few posted flyers. That's really... I struggled to come up with the right word. Everything she had said was true. Every last detail. Amazing. She lit up. Why, thank you. It's nice to have a contemporary appreciate my talents. For once. I asked the question I was afraid to know the answer to. What did you figure out about me? She arched her eyebrow. Do you really want to know? Yeah, no. No way did I want to know whatever theory she had concocted about me. But because there was a very good chance she would be right, I'd prefer to be left in the dark. I had to get her off my scent. She exhaled loudly as Sir Arthur examined some weeds growing from the sidewalk. I observe. Then I assemble all my observations into several different theories and pick the one with the likeliest narrative. It's called deductive reasoning. I don't understand why others don't do it. I realize some people find my observations rude, but I do know when to stay silent. For instance, I didn't bring up your parents' divorce. I kicked a stray rock onto the road. At this point, I wasn't surprised that she had figured that out too. When I was talking to the mover, your mom was twisting her ring finger, which no longer supports a ring. Force of habit, I presume. 6 months ago? 7, I answered gloomily, which was also the amount of time since I had picked up a pen. Until this morning. My sincerest regrets. She patted me on the back, which I could tell wasn't a natural gesture for her. My own powers of observation told me that Shelby Holmes was not the touchy-feely type, and that she was disappointed her guess was wrong by a month. Shelby had already figured out too much, so I tried to not show any emotion on my face as I thought about that. He was such a huge part of my life on the army post. Well, of course he was. He was my dad. He worked in the recruiting office and had better hours than mom, so I would see him more. Then mom went abroad and that was all I had until she returned. Now it was just mom and me. Mom probably thought that being in a new home and city would make us miss him less. In fact, it made it worse. I felt even more alone. I didn't want to think about that. It hurt too much. I also didn't want Shelby to do any more of her Jedi mind tricks, so I tried to distract her. What about your parents? Married? What do they do? They work at Columbia University. Figures that your parents are college professors, I replied. Only 2 Ivy League brainiacs could produce someone like her. Shelby stopped quickly in her tracks. A high-pitched sound that resembled a laugh escaped her throat. My parents? You think my parents are professors? They are about as far from professors as it gets. How did you ever draw that conclusion? Her laughter stung. Well, you don't have to laugh at me, I snapped. I was only asking you a question. You said they worked at Columbia. My sincerest regrets. I couldn't deduce their profession based on your shoelaces. Shelby studied me for a second, and the scowl that had formed on her face had softened. I wasn't laughing at you. I was laughing at the idea of my parents as professors. My father is the officer manager in the administration department, while my mother works as an assistant in the financial aid department. We live in the same building, so there's a distinct probability you'll meet them soon, as well as my brother, Michael. He's 16. Anything else? I stammered, not expecting her to be so open with me. I'm sorry. Her face scrunched up as if the word sorry caused her pain. It probably wasn't a word she used often. I'm not used to people in my age bracket wanting to get to know me. They usually stay far away from me when they know what I can do. I was about to apologize to her, but her attention wasn't on me anymore. She was looking at flyers that had been posted on an abandoned storefront. It was like she was searching for something, or it was possible she was simply bored. I couldn't imagine being bored in a place like New York City with so many places to go, even though I was too intimidated to go to any of them by myself. Where do you go to school? I asked. She yanked down an outdated flyer. I'm pleased to inform you that we'll be attending the same school. How did... I started to ask, but realized she must have seen something in our apartment. Mom spent months researching schools in New York City before we moved. The Harlem Academy of the Arts, a charter school only a few blocks from our apartment, was first on her list. As she kept telling anybody who asked, it had an excellent academic as well as arts curriculum. I had been accepted into the creative writing program. It figured that Shelby would be in an academically challenging school. I simply hadn't pegged her as someone with an artistic side. Violin, she answered before I even had a chance to ask. I also dabble in acting. It's good practice for going undercover. Undercover? She skipped over to a barber shop on the corner where a few guys were sitting outside, fanning themselves in the mid-August heat. Sir Arthur helped himself to the water bowl out front. Why, Miss Shelby Holmes! An older guy with more salt than pepper in his hair reached into his pocket and handed her a butterscotch wrapped in yellow cellophane. You staying out of trouble, or you trying to find some? Shelby unwrapped the candy. What do you think? The men erupted into a chorus of laughter. Who you got over there? The man gestured at me to come forward. Mr. Washington, this is John Watson. He moved into 221A with his mother, a former army doctor. Mr. Washington runs this barbershop and knows almost as much as I do about what's happening in our neighborhood. Well. He gave me a once-over. I stuck my chest out a bit, wanting his approval. Listen here, son. You grow your hair out a bit more, and I'll treat you to a nice new style. Any friend of Shelby's is a friend of mine. First pizza, then a haircut. Why was everybody offering her free stuff? I mean, the haircut was technically for me, but it was because I was a friend of Shelby's. Well, we weren't really friends, but I wasn't going to argue with him. Free was free. Shelby waved goodbye as she crossed the street. You'll like the academy. She continued our conversation from before without missing a beat. I'll also be in 6th grade. I nearly tripped over the curb. How old are you? I'm 9, but I skipped a couple of grades. Of course she had. You don't look 9. I'm aware, she said, kneeling down to pet Sir Arthur. It doesn't bother me. I think it's best to look as young as possible. Why? All I wanted was to grow up and stop being thought of as a little kid. Adults always underestimate kids, especially girls. It does have its advantages. If you saw me on the street, you would probably ignore me. Most people do, she said without an ounce of pity. It allows me to study my marks without worrying about getting caught. Her marks? At this point, I decided to stop asking questions. I didn't think I would ever understand this girl. Plus, I've been practicing jiu-jitsu for a few years, so I'm stronger than I look. Believe me, I'm not somebody people want to mess with. Oh, I believed her all right. I had known her for less than 24 hours and I already knew not to get on her bad side. Now let's focus on you, Shelby said as I tensed up. We've got something to do. We've got to do something about your name. What's wrong with my name? Well, there are 2 other Johns in our class. John Woo goes by John, and John Bryan goes by Brian, so you'll need a sobriquet. I'm going to refer to you as Watson. It suits you. Trust me, you could be called worse things. I was sure Shelby Holmes had been called more than a few names. Know-it-all was one that sprang to mind. Okay, I agreed, knowing it didn't really matter what I wanted to be called. She would have given me whatever name suited her. As we rounded another corner, Shelby's eyes got big. She looked like a little kid on Christmas morning. There, parked outside a deli on the opposite side of the street, was a cop car with its lights flashing. Shelby clapped her hands together excitedly. "Watson, I've got work to do."